Hey there, singers, public speakers, and content creators. My name is Clay Collins, and this is the My Voice Mentor podcast. How many of you singers and public speakers out there, when you get up to perform or present, feel that you're constantly taking breaths? It's almost like your voice feels like it's running away from you. Have you ever encountered that when you get up to sing or speak? Do you feel like you're constantly having to take breaths in? Do you have an overall sense of labor in your voice when you get up to sing or speak? If that's the case, that's actually what we're going to talk about today, because as it turns out, there's a very easy fix to this that can literally change everything overnight. And I can't wait to tell you about it. But before we get into that today, I just want to remind you of my 5-day free vocal bootcamp. This is the best first step for you to take some real tangible steps towards improving your voice and getting the voice you've always dreamed of. This is not just for singers, it's also for content creators and public speakers. I can't wait to share my knowledge of over 30 years with you, things that are going to change your voice right now. It's absolutely free. I highly recommend that you go to myvoicementor.com/bootcamp to get started. It's going to really help your voice, and I can't wait to connect with you and help you on your journey to improve your voice. By the way, this podcast is streaming on all the major platforms, but now also including YouTube as well. So if you both like to see and hear, head on over to youtube.com/@myvoicementor. And while you're there, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe and the bell notification so that you're aware of new episodes as they come out. I actually premiere a day early on YouTube. So if you're one of those early bird type people and you want these as soon as they come out, that is your best bet. But again, if you're listening on Apple and Spotify and those platforms, do me a real favor and give me a review that lets others know how great this content is and helps it get out to more people. All right, enough of that. I want to dive right into this topic today because it's so important. I spend so much time on this with singers. It's one of the foundational things that I work on with every vocalist to make sure they have a firm foundation of this concept. Because the moment you flip the switch in your brain and you apply your singing and your public speaking in this way, as opposed to the way most of us have in the past or started, things begin to change for the better for your voice and real transformation starts to take place. But let's first try to identify the problem. I'm going to identify it for singers, and then we will transition and identify the problem as it relates to public speakers. Now, for singers, it's a thing that happens when we go to sing. It's actually more common for singers, in fact, that typically most of the time when we speak, because we do it on a regular basis and because we're not trying to impress anyone, we tend to get more things right when we talk. We realize that in order to get the communication out, we have to use a lot of words, and we're talking to people all day long. We learn how to compress the voice in such a way, and all that means is bring the vocal cords in such a way that it's optimizing our breath, allowing us to ride a breath as long as possible. In fact, to demonstrate, usually when we talk, we don't talk like this, because the moment you start talking like this, you realize I'm having to take more breaths, and the more I do that, the more breaths I have to take. It's almost, again, that feeling that I described at the beginning of the episode. The voice is continually running away, and you're chasing after breaths, and you're just trying to keep the air in your lungs, and you can't because it's running out of you just as soon as it gets into you. An illustration that I use to describe this is what happens with a balloon if the nozzle that you blow into is completely open and that balloon, let's say, is full of air. It would just leak out very quickly. A lot of times that's what we unknowingly do to our voice when we apply breathiness to our voice. We're basically creating an environment where this down here is having to work especially hard just to get words out and just to get thoughts out. But the more that we tighten that nozzle on the balloon, the more we're actually able to apply pressure to the balloon part in order to make more of a zzz kind of a sound on a balloon, or more of a buzzing type of sound in our voice. So I'm going to demonstrate this both with singing and with speaking. First with singing. All right, I'm just going to sing a couple lines of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. It really doesn't matter what song is the example. The principle is exactly the same. So if I were to sing, and let me do this in a low octave to illustrate. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, How I wonder what you are. Right now, I am really fighting to maintain that breath. Even though I'm not exerting myself, it's a low octave, I am still pushing a lot of air. You probably heard me take several breaths right in the middle of the phrase. In fact, we hear so many singers do that. They'll sing a song and right in the middle of the phrase, they're having to take breaths. And so they do as good of a job that they can to try to make it a stylistic choice, but it's not, because they're so breathy that they have no other choice but to continually take breaths right in the middle of the phrase. In choir, they didn't know how to deal with this phenomenon, so they would say, well, there's 10 of you singing that part, so we're going to have to do this thing where you stagger your breathing. And this guy would go, twinkle, twinkle, and this guy would go, twinkle, twinkle, little star. And the idea was that there would be no breaths, which is the ideal scenario for any choir director. I don't want to hear one breath. Well, what if there's a better way? I actually think there is a better way. We're going to get to that in a second. But that's how it sounds down there. But even if I go up an octave and I try to sing in a breathy tone, twinkle, twinkle, it actually gets harder. Little star. Oh, I feel like I have no foundation or support in my voice. Doesn't matter that I've been singing for 30 years. This is just an impossible way to do this. How I wonder what you are. And I'm actually really exhausting my voice when I do that. I just feel like I have no foundation. I can't get high notes, and it's all just air. There's no real foundation in my voice. For public speakers, maybe not so much for speakers that learn that I've got to project a little bit. Those guys are doing fine. But maybe you are a radio DJ, or maybe you're on a podcast, or you're doing voiceovers and you feel this need to really soften your voice because you don't want harshness. You do know enough that I don't want to be too harsh like this. I don't want to be real harsh on a podcast or whatever. But you go to the other extreme and make it really breathy. I found that in the voiceover work that I do, I was getting really guilty of that because I was trying to soften my voice. And in the process, I was killing my voice. It was so hard on my voice. Maybe you have figured it out. The problem, if you feel like your voice is just running away from you and you're constantly taking breaths, the problem is, the technical scientific term is, you don't have the proper breath support. I haven't prepared this. It all leaks out. Then I got to take a breath and then it all leaks out again. And then I got to take a breath and then it all leaks out again. And the cycle repeats and repeats. So what is the answer? The answer in the most basic, simple terms is a term that we hear or should hear in vocal circles a lot, which is compression. Compression is simply with pressing. That's literally what it means. It's pressing. And there's actually two types of compression that's applied when we talk about vocal compression. There's the horizontal compression of the vocal cords. The vocal cords are up and down, but horizontally we press them together to make sound. And then there is the vertical compression downward on the belly. We have to have both forms of compression in order to get productive sound in the voice. So compression is basically what happens when the vocal cords come together like this. And in order to make sound, compression is taking place. So if you're making sound, there is a form of compression. But likely what is happening is that we have the wrong kind of compression here, which is allowing a lot of air to leak out so that when we want to build intensity in our voice by pressing down here, we can't because we didn't press here properly. So I'm going to create a visual image in your mind. If you're watching this, you'll be able to see visually with my hands, but try to imagine this in your mind if you're just listening. Put your hands up in front of your face in a parallel fashion vertically, right next to each other. This is a position of what I would call an uncompressed vocal cord situation. They're open, they're not touching, and air can freely travel between the two vocal ligaments. We're going to call that fully uncompressed. And now I want you to take your two hands and bring them together, press them together. You can do it as hard as you want or not as hard, as long as they're touching, press them together. That is what I'm going to call full compression of the voice. Okay, so apart, full uncompression, and then pressing together, full compression. If you think of full compression, it's almost like what happens if you bear down on a 10-speed brake system where those brakes are pressing against the tire so much so that tire will not move if you're pressing with enough force. That's what I'm going to call full compression. So those are the two extremes. Full compression means I'm holding my breath essentially, and no amount of pressing down on my abdomen is going to let any air out. That's full compression. The opposite is a completely open vocal cord. Air can just pass through freely. Okay. Now, there's two forms of compression that allow for resonance and vibration to take place. One is a less effective and more potentially fatiguing way of compression, and one is a better way. Okay, so now I want you to hold those hands up by your face, and I just want you to begin lightly clapping them together like this. What I want you to visually see in your mind is, in this scenario, the hands are more open than they are closed. In fact, their natural state is in that open, fully uncompressed position, but then they are momentarily coming together to make that clap, to make that sound, and that is basically what's happening when we make a breathy sound. If I'm making a breathy sound like this, I'm basically holding my vocal cords open and momentarily bringing them together to make that sound, but the default position is open. I called it compression, but we're really going to call this uncompressed vocalizing. The more breathy your voice is, the more uncompressed it is. And you can see visually that there's lots of opportunities in between each clap for air to leak out. And the more I press down on the abdomen, the balloon part of the voice, the more air is going to leak out because these are more open than they are closed. Now, hold your hands together, close them, and this is going to be the default position, closed, full compression. Now what I want you to do is to clap your hands together real quickly by bringing your hands back together. Now I want you to do that a few times. Now if you're listening, you didn't hear an audible difference in what the sound it makes, but visually, if you're watching this, you're seeing, okay, now the reverse is true, and I'm only momentarily pushing my vocal cords apart enough to allow a bubble of air to come through in order for me to bring them back together to make that sound. Again, there's not much difference in the sound at all in this scenario. But as you can see, the second one does not allow for near as much air to pass through. Now, when it comes to the vocal cords, we want to apply this second form of compression, meaning we want to start and end with full compression. I'm going to describe that practically with the voice because it's completely natural if you're not making that connection. We'll connect all the dots here in a second, but for now, it's simply enough for you to just understand the efficiency of keeping your hands in a clapped position in order to keep air that wants to leak out from leaking out. All right, so how do we translate that to what's going on inside the larynx? In a nutshell, to accomplish this form of compression, we have to learn how to hold our breath, aka full compression, how to start and end each vocalization with that principle, and periodically taking in a pulse breath through the abdomen. In other words, most of the time while singing, we're holding our breath. Now, there may be some voice people out there or voice coaches out there that are just shaking your heads and saying, no, don't ever hold your voice as a singer. And I understand we don't want to choke the voice, so we don't want to ever have that. But the truth is, breath control is synonymous with holding your breath. and slowly leaking out your breath and knowing how to strategically take in a quick breath. What I just verbalized right there is one of the most important concepts of breath control. Now, taking that little phrase that I just said that sounds very simple and applying it, it does take some practice. But it is the very thing that transforms your ability to not allow fatigue to set into your voice. How you compress your voice has so much to do with how effective your next song, performance, or presentation is going to be. So I'm going to show you some exercises today that are going to help with this to help make the transition. But first, let me go back to Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. I'm going to first show you the uncompressed way, and then I'm going to show you what compression at least sounds like. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Okay? Now, compression is more like this. I'm bringing the vocal cords together. The moment I do this, I don't have to use nearly as much pressure or air. There is an even balance between downward pressure and upward pressing of the vocal cords. And as you hear it, it has a sleepy sound to it. So I'm going to do it in this low octave because this is usually the way low compression sounds like. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Now, if you noticed, I'm really close to this microphone. You don't hear any breaths coming out of my voice because I'm really controlling that air. I'm holding my breath and I'm slowly leaking it out. What about it in high octave? Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. Held my breath. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Okay, I think you get the point. I've learned how to slowly leak out the voice. And that is the key. That's the beginning steps to compressing your voice. Now, what does this mean for the speaker? It means transitioning this voice into this voice. Learning how to relax the voice, to compress, is the key to vocal strength. Because the more you compress the voice, the stronger and more resilient it gets. The more you uncompress the voice, the weaker it gets. So let me ask you a question in closing. In your voice, do you hear more breathiness or more compression? Do you hear this and feel this in your tone? Or do you hear more of this in your tone? For those of you who both speak and sing, do you notice a difference when you talk versus when you sing? Now, another concept of speech level singing basically says that really singing and speaking really should sound basically the same. Maybe there's a difference. I bet you that difference is centered around how you're compressing the voice. If this is something that you'd like to dive in further, again, I recommend you get my 5-day free vocal bootcamp. There's a lesson in there that goes into a little bit more detail on compression. But if this is something that you'd like some serious improvement on, at the end of that 5 days, you're going to be invited to a 30-day free trial of my voice mentoring program that you can actually get live coaching with me, up to 8 hours of it within that 30 days, where you can get live coaching from me, where I can help you step through this with your voice to get you on a path to improve your voice. So I hope to see you down that path. But in the meantime, I really want to give you this thought that learning how to control the breath out of your mouth is really going to help you. So I want to leave you with one exercise. It's called the slow leak. It goes like this. Take in a nice deep abdomen breath and leak it out on an S sound as softly and quietly as you can. all the way until you can't push out any more air. Do that a few times. That is a great way to begin changing your mindset on how air leaks out of your body. You should always feel like you're holding that breath because it's precious, and then you slowly leak it out. I hope I've given you some things to think about, and I hope I've given you some things to apply to your singing right now. There's some real gold in what I've talked here today, and I would love to hear from you about how this is helping you with your singing. So feel free to reach out to me at clay@myvoicementor.com. I'm here to answer your questions, and I love to hear your feedback. So until next time, keep investing in your voice. It is the best investment you can make. I'll see you next time.